128 Yada Yahowah, Shanah, years. 4. Mashyach, Anointed. Knowing who, when, why, and how. Now that Gabriel has been properly introduced, and the purpose of this revelation has been established, it is time to consider the prophecy. What follows provides the blueprint for redemption and adoption, reconciliation and everlasting life. And you'll note that it is focused upon your people and your city, Yahweh and Yerushalayim. When we consider what Dowd revealed, it is nothing less than majestic in its scope. No less a man with the vows pertaining to the things 7 represents, even 77s, YYV7C4, are determined and decreed, Chatak, he has planned, divided out, and marked, on behalf of your people, the extended family, Alamota, for your kin, and upon your set-apart city and its distinctly uncommon inhabitants, Wa'al-Ir Kodesh Otter, over your special and separated population center, including those who are separated and distinct and, thus, not religious, to bring an end to the religious rebellion, eliminating the revolting communal defiance and contrarian views, La Kalaha Pesha, for the abolition and complete purging of revolting opposition, of pervasive transgression, of being at fault, guilty of being contrarians who have defected from the relationship, to affix the signature which seals up the guilt associated with 129 having missed the way, precluding ever being seen as wrong again, while our Chatouth, to affirming the authenticity of that which constrains and prevents everything associated with going astray, to provide reconciliation for religious error, purging the perverse corruptions and removing the twisted perversions, while our Kafir A1, to cover over by atoning, ransoming and annulling distortions, to arrive with and bring that which is eternally right, always correct, forever accurate and honest, thereby attaining everlasting deliverance and vindication, while our boat Tzedek Olam, to come with ongoing and perpetual justice and deliverance, innocence and prosperity, returning to pursue enduring righteousness, to provide a personal seal and signature to revelation, confirming and completing these communications, while our Chatham Kazone Wanabi, to confirm and complete the visual communication from God about the future, and to prophecy, Wanabi, to the prophet, while also anointing the most set apart, while our Mashyach, Kodesh, and to consecrate, dedicate, and prepare the separated, special, distinctly different, and uniquely uncommon. Daniel, my God judges, condemns, and vindicates, Daniel 9:24. This is Dowd's story, explaining why he was willing and able to fulfill the decree Yahweh had made to his people through the 7 Mikra, invitations. With his arrival in Yerushalayim in advance of Passover and then again on Kippurim, he has and will bring an end to the consequence of religious rebellion and contrarian views. With him serving as our Lamb and our Shepherd, God's people will never stray again. With our souls perfected and the relationship reconciled on these occasions, Israel will be right forevermore, becoming eternally vindicated. This is the summation of all prophecy. And the fruition of God's promises occurs as Dowd anoints the mercy seat of the covenant within the Kodesh of God's home on Yom Kippurim so that we can celebrate Sukkah. 130 This pronouncement is for Daniel's people and extended family and, thus, for Jews. It is for his city, which is Jerusalem. Best of all, he is committing to eliminate the guilt of his people, removing it from them. The reason that I included, but did not lead with, the customary 77's rendering of YYV7C4 in this context is that we were not given a starting point, and when one is provided in the next statement, the timeline becomes 7 plus 62 weeks. Also, since Dowd is the focus of all 7 Mikra, including being the first to be enriched and empowered by Shabuah, YYV7C4 is communicating something considerably more important. This insight is fostered by the recognition that Shabuah follows Bikurim, firstborn children by 7 weeks. It serves to improve the witness of God's family, beginning with the Bekuah, firstborn, Dowd. As such, Shabuah is a celebration of how his sacrifices during Chag Matzah conceive and benefit the covenant relationship. Further, as the 4th of 7 invitations to be called out and meet, the reference to Shabuah correlates to the 4th millennium of human history when it was fulfilled. And as the middle Mikra, Shabuah corresponds to Dowd's purpose and position at the midpoint of God's restorative timeline. With Shabuah focused upon enlightening the minds and enriching the lives of the beneficiaries of Chag Matzah, and with it explaining when, why, and through whom this would occur, understanding its position within Yahweh's overall plan, is instrumental to appreciating how we got to this place and where we go from here. Therefore, when we account for the generations from Adam to Abraham, we find that 40 Yaubel, or 2,000 years, separate them. Additionally, another 40 Yaubel 131 transpire from Abraham's experience on Mount Moriah to Dowd's Passover sacrifice in this same place. And that means that a pattern has emerged. 2,000 years after Adam's and Chor's expulsion from the Garden of Eden, God confirmed the covenant in 1968 BCE, year 2000 year, with Abraham, Sarah, and Yitzhak for us to return home. Then to provide the resulting rewards, including immortality, perfection, adoption, enrichment, and empowerment, God's attention would return to Moriah 40 Yahweh thereafter in year 4000 year, 33c, with his son walking out of the pages of the Torah to fulfill Passover, unyeasted bread, and firstborn children followed by the promise of 7. But that would not be the end of God's story. 40 Yahweh later, on the Mikra of Kippurim in year 6000 year, sunset on October 2, 2033, father and son will return to reconcile their relationship with Yisrael and Yahweh, restoring the covenant by integrating the Torah into our lives. 5 days later, as we celebrate Sukkah, shelters, we will enjoy the final 1,000 years of human history on this planet, camping out with our Heavenly Father and Brother, through year 7000 year. Along these lines, the 7 days of creation, the depiction of the Shabat, the number of invitations to be called out and meet and, indeed, the history of humankind estranged from God, even the number of ruach devoted to facilitating the book you are reading are predicated upon the formula of 6 plus 1 equates to 7. As such, nearly 6,000 years of man separated from Yahweh have transpired since humankind was expelled from Eden. We are, therefore, on the cusp of the 1,000-year celebration of living together again. In this light, YYV7C4 defines the passage of time from the beginning to the conclusion of God's story. 132 Also interesting, when we add the 7 weeks of years between the edict to return and the restoration of Yerushalayim, to the 62 weeks of years between that time and the fulfillment of the first 4 Mikra, we are left 1 week of years shy of 70. If that 7-year difference is attributed to the time of trouble, the inference is that nothing of merit occurred between year 4000 year in 33c when the first 4 Mikra were fulfilled and year 5993 year in 2026, 7 years prior to Yah's return. Considering all that he said would be accomplished, by offering these numbers and describing the results, Dowd is directing us to his arrival to fulfill Chag Matzah, and to his return on Yom Kippurim. He wants his people to be aware of how different the last 7 years will be compared to everything else they have previously endured. And from this perspective, by providing the date he will fulfill Chag Matzah and then jumping ahead 1993 years to the 7 years preceding his return to fulfill Yom Kippurim, he is bypassing the era of the rabbis and the church age. It suggests that they are counter to the objectives which have been delineated or superfluous to them. And this realization precludes the proposition of a different Messiah and competing testimonials being part of God's plan. Since Dowd will go on to present the exact day and year he will arrive to begin fulfilling the first 4 Mod Mikra, Pesach, Matzah, Bikurim, and Shabuah, there are aspects of these invitations to meet which are germane to the prophecy. By fulfilling Passover and unyeasted bread, God's children become immortal and are perfected, thereby forever resolving the consequence of Pesha, Shatar, and Awan, while ushering in an Olam celebration of everything which is tzedek. Therefore, this statement from Dowd was spoken to unfurl the entire canvas of time and the Torah. It is God's tapestry from the first strand to the final knot. 133 From the perspective of time, YYV7C4 is 77's or, potentially, 70 by 7 equals 490 prophetic years. Elsewhere, when Daniel wants to convey a week of 7 days, he spells it out just that way. For example, in Daniel 10:2, the prophet reveals that he was in mourning for 3 weeks of days. It isn't until Dowd's next statement that he pinpoints the exact day in the Yahweh year of 4000 year when the first 4 Mod Mikra would be, and now have been, fulfilled. From there, we can readily deduce Yahweh's and Dowd's return on Yom Kippurim in year 6000 year, to the minute, hour, day, and year. We can also turn back the clock 40 Yahweh from year 4000 year to ascertain when the Berith covenant was ratified between Yahweh, Abraham, Sarah, and Yitzhak. Another 40 Yahweh back in time takes us to the day Adam and Chor were exiled from the garden, establishing the year Yahweh's 7000-year calendar began to unfold. It is also interesting to travel in time to the midway point between Adam and Abraham, 20 Yahweh from each, because we arrive at Noach's birth in advance of the flood. Similarly, by splitting the difference between Abraham and Dowd's sacrifice as the Pesach El, we are directed to the year the cornerstone was laid in year 3000 year. There are some interesting subtleties associated with Chatak, determined and decreed which we should consider because it is a precise computation of time. God has a plan. It has been marked out for us in the Torah wa Nabi. It will play out on his schedule, on the very days he has determined. Time, from Yah's perspective, is divided and segmented, with one event separated from the next by an exacting measure, and God is resolute in his resolve to see 134 his plan through. There will be no hesitation, equivocation, or delay. Also relevant, since the dates of the moed are determined every year, with Passover, unyeasted bread, and firstborn children celebrated on the 14th, 15th, and 16th days of the first month, we should expect that Daud's revelation will lead us directly to Pesach in the Yabel Shanah of 4,000 year. If so, God assuredly knows when and where he is going to fulfill his promises. And since he provided us with the means to determine these dates, we are privy to what he knows. There is no justification or excuse for the random dating Maimonides thrust upon an ignorant and unsuspecting audience. Here in the summer of 2023, as we approach Sukkah, it is year 5990 Yah, with just 10 years remaining before Yahowah's return on Yom Kippurim in year 6000 Yah, sunset in Jerusalem, 6:22 p.m. local time, on October 2, 2033. The Rambam was wrong on all accounts. Creation occurred 14 billion years ago, not in 3759 BCE as he claimed. Further, the expulsion from Gan Eden, marking year 0 year, transpired in 3968 BCE. A new year begins on the 1st of Abib, in the spring, not when the Babylonians observed Rosh Hashanah. But since the rabbi was more impressed with his own calculations than the genealogies established in the Torah for this purpose, his sanctification of the moon scheme has led Jews astray for over 800 years. When Yahweh inspires one of his prophets to say Am for your people, he is almost always addressing Yisrael and Yahweh. Not only is this affirmed by the constant references to Am throughout the Torah, Am also means family. Therefore, the plan Yahweh is unfurling would be designed in support of the 135 covenant he established with Yisrael beginning with Abraham and Sarah. Yahweh's focus is on Yerushalayim, the source of guidance on reconciliation. The Ir Kodesh, set-apart city, therefore, not only denotes the location where these prophecies would be fulfilled but, also, for whom. It is the most Kodesh, set-apart place on earth. It is in Jerusalem that Yahweh made it possible for us to be separated from the Pesha, Chatar, and Awan of man and Tzedek regarding him. Kodesh is among the most revealing and least understood terms in the Hebrew lexicon. It means to be set apart. It affirms that God wants us to be like him, distinct from the ways of man and, thus, uncommon. So, when we consider the two most pervasive and popular human agencies, to be Kodesh means that we should not be religious or political. To be set apart unto Yahweh is to be separated from such things. Everything which is important to Yahweh is Kodesh, including the Ruach Kodesh, set-apart spirit. Yisrael, Yahweh, Yerushalayim, and Moriah are Kodesh, as are Yahweh's name, his Torah, Berith, Mikra, and Shabat, including his Ben, son and Am, family. Within its third iteration, there will be a Kodesh, most set-apart place. It will model the location where Yahweh was seen and heard above the Ark of the Covenant. And it will be here that Daud will Mashyach, anoint the Kaporith, mercy seat as the first order of business upon his return on Yom Kippurim, doing so within the Beit, home he and his father will erect with their words. Each of these things is separate and distinct from the common aspects of the human experience. And while they are all unique and special to God, the most set apart are the 136 Spirit, his Son, and the place within his home devoted to the reconciliation of his family. Therefore, when theologians mistranslate Yahweh's revelation using religious terminology like holy, the faithful are played for fools. They are stupefied into believing that religion is the cure rather than the disease. In truth, hell is set apart from God while Shamaim, heaven is set apart from religion. Since this prophecy was so comprehensive in scope, it is important to recognize that the fulfillments of the first four modim by God's Son in year 4000 year laid the foundation for this result. They provide the means to life and redemption which underlying the second chance that is being afforded God's people during reconciliations. And that makes Kippurim the final opportunity to receive the benefits of the covenant for Yahweh. Through Pesach, Matzah, Bikurim, and Shabuah, it is now possible to reconcile their relationship on during Yahweh's and Daud's return. That is what we are revealing through Towrah's moment, the most important Mikra. While there is no Kippurim without the prior fulfillments of Pesach, Matzah, Bikurim, and Shabuah by the Messiah, the day of reconciliations will not occur as foretold, and the Messiah will not return, unless the message we are heralding begins to resonate with Yahweh in Yisrael. Yahweh has promised to restore his relationship with his people on this day, revealing that there will be a family reunion in Jerusalem including thousands of Israelites. And for that to transpire, each must cease being political and religious and become sufficiently aware and accepting of what God is offering and requesting to welcome Father and Son in the way that has been foretold. If not, Satan prevails, and Project Humanity is foreclosed. 137 The reason I was chosen and these books have been written, the reason that there are scores of prophecies pertaining to what you are reading, is that we must garner Israel's attention for Yahweh's plan to prevail. The idea of father and son returning to an entirely hostile crowd, which is all that currently exists among the religious and political in Israel, is not only heartbreaking, but earth-shattering. With this rendezvous with our destiny a decade away, everything is hanging in the balance. Fortunately, we do not have to win the popular vote, and will likely lose it by a factor of more than a 1,000 to 1 among YYV and in excess of a 1 million to 1 with GAUM. Should we, when we, achieve this level of success, worldwide, with at least 7,000 Israelites and YYV in Yerushalayim amidst the carnage of troubles during the early evening hours of October 2, 2033, Yom Kippurim in year 6000 year, God and his people prevail. Sukkah and happily ever after will follow. Daud's magnificent prophecy will be fulfilled. Towrah will have prevailed and Kippurim will have occurred. Father and son will have returned and the Berith will have been restored. That is a reasonable summation of Gabriel's, Daud's profoundly important revelation. Prophecy ends, the witness begins, and everything is made right according to God's plan. And so, now you know why I was the first to recognize that Gabriel is Daud, that he is the prophet, not Daniel. You know why I was the first to realize that Daud is the Messiah and Son of God, the Zarawah, who fulfilled the Mikra to make all of this possible. You know why I was the first to reveal the proper pronunciation of Yahweh's name and then disclose his timeline, including the moment he will return. You know why I was the first to delineate the 5 conditions and benefits of the covenant, revealing what God was offering and requesting in return. 138 You know why I was the first to properly define the purpose of the Modim and then ascribe the benefits to the Berith, revealing how one enables the other. You know why Yahweh assigned 7 Ruach to enable this result and then spoke so vociferously about what we would achieve together. While I'm nothing more than a witness, a voice calling out to God's people, the King's Herald, a Chota, Nakri, and the final Zarawah for Towrah, Kippurim is fast approaching, and father and son intend to celebrate their family reunion. And since you are reading these words, I expect that you will be there with us. The message Daud conveyed to us through Daniel must be shared for it to resonate, and draw a sufficient audience to fulfill the day of reconciliations. Therefore, the 6 resolutions on Daud's list will be understood and appreciated as they play out over time, commencing in year 4000 year with Chag Matzah and concluding during Kippurim, and Sukkah in 6000 year. This means that the one being anointed a 4th time is Daud. And the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant will now represent his seat of honor before his people because he has unified them again, bringing them together with Yahweh. Yes, all of this is Daud's doing. I am nothing more than his herald, letting you know who he is and what he has achieved. Now that the Messiah has revealed when, for whom, and where he is going to act pursuant to this prophecy, let's consider why he is committed to accomplishing this list of 6 things. The first is La Kalaha Pesha, to bring an end to the revolting religious rebellion. According to God, the Israelites have engaged in communal insubordination and mass defection, showing solidarity in their contrarian positions. And while this means that Judaism has been toxic to Jews, it is no more or less deadly than Christianity or Islam, socialist secular humanism or communism. Wrong comes in many flavors. 139 What's worse, replacing the Shabat with Sunday or imposing 1,000 meaningless restrictions upon the 7th day, supplanting the Torah with the New Testament or the Talmud, believing that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Messiah or repressing the realization that Daud served as the Passover lamb and that he is the Son of God and Messiah. What's worse, believing that there is no God or establishing the Lord as God. Do you think Yahweh is bothered more by those who claim he does not exist or by those who confuse him for Satan? What do you suppose he finds more offensive, being identified with a star or the image of a dead god on a stick? Is the Jewish corruption of Pesach and Matzah worse than the Christian opposition to them? Kala reveals that Yahweh is promising to put an end to the communal defiance and religious rebellion of his people, eliminating these things. For God to enjoy our company, for the earth to become like Eden, and for heaven to be joyful, there must be a place and time where the choice to rebel and to be revolting no longer exists. In this regard, Pesha serves to demonstrate a crucial aspect of human nature that must be resolved by the Messiah. It is punishment which fits the crime, especially in association with institutional, societal, and national guilt born of rebellion. This axiom undergirds most justice systems: commit a crime, do the time. Consequence and responsibility are the underpinnings of morality. And what is true in the here and now is also viable in the hereafter, although the consequences are more enduring. Yahweh is fair, so there will be recompense. Those who have misled his people, harming them, will be held accountable. Therefore, Yahweh's return on Yom Kippurim to celebrate Sukkah will be more than a day of reconciliations and time to camp out, because 45 days of judgment will follow, thereby bringing an end to religious rebellion. 140 The second statement of purpose has been and will continue to be fulfilled in increments. It began with the Torah serving as the La Chatam Chatar, signed document which seals up the guilt associated with being wrong and missing the way. Through the benefits of the covenant and by acting to fulfill Passover, unyeasted bread, firstborn children, and the promise of 7, father and son have attested to the authenticity of the Torah. And specifically, Daud's Nipesh, incorporeal soul, once free of his basar, corporeal body, was laden with our guilt, enabling him to carry it with him into Shaul. He left it there during Matzah, never to be seen again. The removal of our guilt is the most amazing part of this wonderful prophecy, one we should accept and cherish. However, as was the case with the first of these 6 statements of purpose, while the groundwork was laid and the remedy was provided to remove the persistent encroachment of religion and politics in Israel in year 4000 with the fulfillment of the first 4 Mikra, this prophecy will be fulfilled in stages with the final act occurring on the Day of Reconciliations in year 6000 so that we can camp out together forevermore. That is when Yahowah will place his Torah inside of the covenant's children while writing his name on our hearts. Chatar is typically translated as sin when it is more correctly rendered as guilt. And since it is derived from chatter, it is the result of having missed the way and going astray. To be chatar is to be misled and wrong about God. As such, chatar is caused by religion, the lone institution responsible for mass deception regarding the Almighty. This brings us to the third statement of purpose, one which also directs our attention to Yom Kippurim, in year 6000 Daud promised La Kafir A1, to provide reconciliation for the perverse distortions associated with 141 religious corruptions. Relative to Israel, kafir, restoration of the relationship is the prime objective. This is the verb that explains the purpose of the Day of Reconciliations. Kafir also sits at the heart of the Kaporith, mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And both the mercy seat and this Mikra are irrevocably linked to the son's return with his father. The covenant was broken by Israel, so for God's people to return to fellowship, the relationship must be reconciled, which is to be made harmonious again. The wrongs will have to be pardoned and forgiven, atoned and annulled. The interesting thing about Kippurim, is that unlike the other 6 modes which serve Yahweh and Gawim, the Day of Reconciliations is intended for Israel. This denotes the day when God's people are reunited with one another and with Yahowah. A remnant will recognize Yahowah at long last and greet him by name as he returns to Yerushalayim. Therefore, Yom Kippurim meets all of the previous criteria, it will occur on a predetermined date, it is for God's people, it will materialize in Jerusalem, it will bring an end to religious rebellion, and it is the day Yahowah will place his Torah, guidance and signature within his people such that they will never again go astray or wander away from him. And this means that Daud is speaking of his arrival as Messiah and King. Israel broke the Berith by promoting A1, perverse corruptions of the truth. They went from right to wrong, liberated to servitude, enriched to impoverished, life to death, vindicated to condemned. A1 depicts a precipitous fall because there is nothing more damaging to our relationship with God than trafficking in that which is inaccurate and untrustworthy. Far worse than ignoring Yahowah's testimony is corrupting and perverting it, 142 bending and twisting it, because doing so conceals the truth and provides false hope. If you open a lexicon to kafir, the first thing you are likely to read would be to make atonement. But that is a religious term, meaning to make reparation to atone for sin. As noted earlier, God has no interest in us begging for forgiveness or suffering for our guilt because he and his Son have already facilitated our redemption and reconciliation, rendering us innocent and ending the prolonged divorce. There is a secondary connotation to kafir which begins to make sense when viewed in association with the work of the Ruach Kodesh. On 4 occasions, including the Mikra of Kippurim, we are invited to approach the maternal manifestation of Yah's light, the set-apart spirit. Her intent is to kafir, cover us in a garment of light. In this way, kafir is similar to being anointed, which also means to coat or cover. This correlation is significant because David, as the exemplar of the covenant, was anointed both with oil and by the Ruach, symbolically demonstrating what God has planned for his children. In addition, during these modim, Ishar speaks of the maternal manifestation of God's fiery light. This is significant because fire transforms decomposing organic matter into radiant light and energy. This is indicative of our transformation from flawed and mortal corporeal beings stuck in the ordinary flow of time to perfected and eternal incorporeal souls thriving in the 7th dimension. Moving to the 4th of 6 prophetic promises offered in association with 77s, the Messiah stands ready to correct the consequence of Pesha, Chatar, and A1 by Labot Tzedek Olam, arriving with and bringing that which is eternally right, correct, accurate, and 143 honest, thereby attaining everlasting vindication. Now that the relationship has been reconciled, our Heavenly Father and His Son want to surround us with that which is accurate and true, honest and reliable. They intend for our relationship to be perfect and enduring. And for this to occur, our Father is committed to writing His Torah, guidance inside of us. We will have perfect and unencumbered access to the truth forevermore. As we move past the first three promises to the fourth, we transition from Dowd righting wrongs to wanting us to be right. Having rid the world of religion, he and his Father are celebrating our perfection. Having returned to Eden, all is good again between God and man. The fifth statement of purpose is one that the religious can neither fathom nor accept. There were only two prophets after this pronouncement, Zechariah and Malachi. Therefore, Gabriel, God's most capable and confident individual, revealed that all of this would la chatam kazon wa nabi, provide a personal seal and signature to the documentation and authenticity which curtails the flow of communication from God through the prophets. This is one of many reasons why Yahweh never refers to his Nakri and Chota, Dowd's Basar and Zarawah, as anything more than an Ed, witness, and never as a Nabi, prophet. Enough has been said and plenty has been proven to garner your undivided attention and motivate God's people to come home. Should you be curious, there is very little if anything useful or new in the book of Revelation. The parts which are reliable are paraphrases of the actual prophets such as Yeshaya, Yirmiah, and Zechariah. Unfortunately, the rest of Revelation is heavily reliant on Ezekiel's fanciful tales of satanic doom, such that it, like the rest of the New Testament, fails Yahweh's Torah test regarding his 144 inspiration. Sadly, there are some 38 citations from Ezekiel in Revelations, one of which would be sufficient to condemn the book. Further, should John have been the author, he remained horribly confused by Daniel and was unable to distinguish between the actual Mashyach and the Christian fable. The continuous flow of future insights from Yahweh through his prophets, beginning with Moses circa 1450 BCE, would conclude 1000 years thereafter with in year 4000 year to enable the promises relative to the first four Mikra, and then again in year 6000 year to engender the benefits of the final two mode. And in between, they would enable the witness of Towrah en route to celebrating Towrah. In so doing, they provided the final seal attesting to the validity of their witness. The sixth provision is intriguing. Gabriel, God's most effective man and his anointed, said, "While our Mashyach Kodesh Kodesh," and to anoint the most set apart. He was speaking of himself, and of the mercy seat within Yahweh's home. Mashyach conveys the idea of dedicating a person or object for service, setting him or it apart through the process of anointing. To anoint addresses covering the person with olive oil, although an object, like the Kaporith, mercy seat, can be symbolically anointed with blood depending upon the occasion and purpose. This liquid can be applied in a variety of ways, from spreading to smearing, from rubbing to sprinkling. Olive oil is symbolic in its own right. It served as the purest source of light in the ancient world. Light conveys Yahweh's timeless nature, his energy, and the enlightenment he provides. Therefore, to be anointed in 145 olive oil is to be covered in Yahweh's spirit of light. This symbolism suggests that the anointed will manifest Yahweh's nature to enlighten us. Olive oil was also rubbed on wounds to promote healing, a metaphor for salvation. It was an important part of a healthy diet, consistent with the nurturing nature of the set-apart spirit. Olive oil was used throughout the Mikra harvests. It was poured over fine grain, representing saved souls, and either sent aloft by way of a wave offering or fire. This provided a visual picture of what happens to us when we are anointed by the set-apart spirit. Also, when it comes to La Mashyach, Kodesh Kodesh, it is helpful to know that Messiah is from Mashyach, a derivative of Mashyach, to anoint. So, if we were to consider the man most set apart unto Yahweh, the man most anointed by Yahweh, the man who is irrefutably Ha-Mashyach, the Messiah, our attention is drawn to Dowd, David. This insight becomes especially relevant because there is a place that is also Kodesh Kodesh, most set apart, and that is the innermost chamber of Yahweh's home. This is the location of the Kaporith, mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And as we discovered in Mode, Appointments volume of Yada Yahowah, when Ha-Mashyach Dowd returns with Yahweh, he will anoint the mercy seat with a smattering of blood, honoring the Torah's prescription for reconciliation during Yom Kippurim. The most Kodesh of the Mikra is actually Chag Matzah. Inclusive of Pesach and Bikurim, it was also the most difficult and painful to fulfill. It would necessitate Dowd, after serving as the lamb, allowing his soul to be laden with our guilt prior to being sent to the place of separation from Yahweh. Matzah is the redeeming 146 sacrifice when our guilt is removed and set aside, never to be seen or considered again. Throughout the most Kodesh Mikra, the Ruach Kodesh, set-apart spirit would serve as the prime facilitator, conveying Dowd's Nepesh to and from Shal. These aspects of Kodesh, being set apart, being manifest, during the fulfillment of Chag Matzah warrant the dual application of Kodesh Kodesh. However, Kippurim is also Kodesh, as is Dowd who will also be fulfilling it. And therefore, collectively, they are the Kodesh Kodesh, the most set apart. This will be especially so upon Dowd's return. During Kippurim, the Mashyach will re-establish Yahowah's home with his words, placing it above the current location of the original Ark of the Covenant. Then Dowd will enter the Kodesh Kodesh and Mashyach, anoint the Kaporith, mercy seat, facilitating the Torah's promise to restore Yahowah's family. This will be the king's crowning achievement. He will fulfill the final Chatak, decree he made on behalf of God's people, doing so within his city. Poetically, profoundly, and prophetically, this will all occur in concert with YYV7C4, the promise of a second enriching and empowering, emancipating and enlightening Shabat, one for the original beneficiaries of Chag Matzah and the second for tomorrow's attendees at Kippurim. Every promise Yahowah has made to Israel through the 7 Mikra will be fulfilled as God's reunified family stands beside the king as he rids the earth of Israel's foes. Simultaneously, his father will restore the planet so that we can sukkah, camp out together. The 7 days of shelters will then lead us into the final Shabat, the 7th millennium. Chag Matzah and Kippurim will work in harmony to produce the ultimate Shabat, promise 147 of the Shabat as Israelites are emancipated, enriched, empowered, and enlightened, the vow of 7 sevens fulfilled. In this way, everything Kodesh will be tzedek, right again, including the Am of Yisrael, Yahweh and Yerushalayim, occurring Al Moriah with the restoration of the Beith for the Berith through the Torah and Mikra so that we can enjoy the Shabat. Therefore, the most set-apart individual, the man most frequently anointed, is returning to anoint the Kodesh Kaporith in the only Kodesh Kodesh place on earth during the Kodesh Mikra of Kippurim. That is too many Kodesh to ignore. And therefore, Dowd's fulfillment of Chag Matzah with its wealth of Kodesh designations in year 4000 year is what will enable the celebration of the Mikra of Kippurim with the Mashyach in year 6000 year. Relative to the idea of being Kodesh in this setting, there are 3 amazing references in the 89th Mizmor, with the entire psalm written to affirm that the Mashyach Kodesh Kodesh is God's beloved Son, our returning Shepherd and Savior, Messiah and King, the Zarawah, Dowd, David. So, with the 10th chapter, To Dowd or Not to Dowd, of Coming Home devoted to painting the portrait of the man speaking to us on this occasion, a summation of its highlights will be added to the conclusion of this chapter. And along with it, we will be all benefit by reconsidering 2 Samuel 7 in light of what we have just read. Before we move on to the next statement, I'd like to explain where we have just been. Gabriel, God's most capable and courageous man said. The many promises associated with Shabat and the Shabat, along with the vows pertaining to the things 7 represents, even 77s, YYV7C4, are determined and decreed, 148 divided out and planned, Chatak, on behalf of your people, the extended family, Al-Otter, and upon your set-apart city and its distinctly uncommon inhabitants, Wa al-Ir Kodesh Otter, to bring an end to the religious rebellion, eliminating the revolting communal defiance and contrarian views. La Kala Ha-Pesha, to affix the signature which seals up the guilt associated with having missed the way, precluding ever being wrong again, while La Chatam Chatauth, to provide reconciliation for religious error, purging the perverse corruptions and twisted perversions, while La Kafir Awan, to arrive with and bring that which is eternally right, always correct, forever accurate and honest, thereby attaining everlasting deliverance and vindication, while La Bo Tzedek Olam, to provide a personal seal and signature to revelation, confirming and completing these communications, while our Chatam Kazon wa Nabi, and to prophecy, wa Nabi, to the prophet, while also anointing the most set apart, while our Mashyach Kodesh Kodesh. Daniel 9:24. This is Dowd's story, explaining why he was empowered and enriched, enlightened and enabled to fulfill the decree Yahowah had made to his people through the 7 Mikra, invitations to be called out. With his arrival in Yerushalayim during Chag Matzah and again on Yom Kippurim, he will bring an end to death and guilt, religious rebellion and contrarian views. With him serving as our Lamb and Shepherd, God's people will never stray again. With the relationship reconciled on these occasions, Israel will be right forevermore, always correct and thus eternally vindicated. This is the summation of all prophecy. After the fulfillment of Pesach and Matzah leading to Bikurim Shabat, the fruition of God's promises transpire the moment Dowd anoints the mercy seat of the covenant within the Kodesh Kodesh of God's home on Yom Kippurim to usher in Sukkah in the Yabel year of 1,496,000 year. It is just one sentence, and yet, it is the blueprint for reconciliation and everlasting life. Moving on, I suspect that you will be as surprised as I was by what follows. Therefore, Yada, it is beneficial for you to be aware by coming to possess the information required to recognize, Kalim-perfect Joseph, and gain the insights to understand, Wasakel, realizing that the best option is for you to be prudent after learning, succeeding and prospering by being attentive, properly educated, intelligent, and wise, perceiving, Hyphil-imperfect Joseph, that from, Min, the going forth of the word, Motza Dabar. The stage being set to begin the process in accord with the message, to return to restore, Tube, to bring back to its original state, rebuilding, Wala Banar, and re-establishing, Yahushalem, the source of teaching and guidance on reconciliation, until the restoring testimony and eternal witness, up to, as far as, for an extension of time to become victorious and receive the spoils evidenced by the witness, of the Son of the Sovereign who is conspicuously making this known. And who is providing the leadership and counsel, of the one who has officially obtained the status of being properly appointed, and who has expounded upon, announced, and proclaimed the message, of the Mashyach, the anointed Messiah, Mashyach, the one who is set apart, anointed, and prepared to serve as authorized, are 7 sevens, and thus 7 promises and fulfilled vows, Sheba, contractual oaths fulfilled in harmony with the promises of Shabat over 7 periods of 7 weeks. 150 therefore, in 62 weeks, Shabuim Sheshim Shanaim, based upon the promise of 7, in 60 and 2 weeks, she will be restored, she will return and recover, and rebuilt to re-establish and fortify, Banar, she will develop, the way to grow and expand, Rachab, opening the way by expanding where people can congregate, from Rachab, to grow larger and expand, by being diligent and decisive, Karuz, by becoming sharper, more determined, increasingly judgmental, separated and defensive. In a troubled time of oppression, Wabatsok Ha'etz, during a period of anguishing subjugation, restrictions, constraints, and persecution, being harassed and pushed into a corner, from Chuk, to constrain and oppress. Daniel, my God is judgmental, Daniel 9:25. Gabriel, God's most confident and capable, courageous and combative man, the Almighty's exceptionally proficient and powerful defender, an exemplar of character who confirms the truth, a particularly strong and resolute person who is aggressive and confrontational, a fighter who prevails with Almighty God, also known as Daud, prefaced his prophecy with Yada and Shakel. That is to say, by prudently processing this information, we will gain the insights needed to understand. As a diligent defender and thoughtful savior, Daud is the thinking man's prophet. So, to be on the same page with the Messiah, we should linger on this page with him for a while. He is predicting that there will be a public decree issued regarding the liberation of Yahudim, Jews from Babylon where religion is commingled with politics to confuse. Therefore, since this is the second of 3 Yatzah departures, it is worth considering the similarity between this and the decree to leave Miraim, the crucibles of religious and political oppression during Pesach. This is because Yahweh introduced Pesach, 151 Matzah, Bikurim, and Shabat to physically liberate the children of Israel from religious and political oppression. The process would continue with Yahweh explaining the Mikra to Moses within his Torah guidance, which was likely received during Shabat. This ultimately led to God's people coming home by entering the Promised Land. The proclamation Daud is currently issuing is similar. This time, Yahudim will be liberated from religious and political subjugation in Babel, the birthplace of the beast which would evolve from Babylon to Persia, and through Greece to Imperial Rome, and ultimately to the Roman Catholic Church. Not only would they be physically freed, but Yahudim would also be able to rebuild Yahushalem, the source of guidance on reconciliation and the city of Daud. And of course, there would be bookends, with Imperial Rome destroying what was rebuilt following this decree. Then after the passage of the specified time, Daud would return to his city to serve his people by fulfilling Pesach and Matzah leading to Bikurim and Shabat. In so doing, the Nipesh, souls of covenant members would be allowed to come home, to survive the tyranny of Roman politics and the subjugation of the Roman Catholic religion. Nearly 40 Yahweh thereafter, we are using Towrah to call a remnant of Israel and Yahweh home, back to the Promised Land, to their Messiah, and to Yahweh. This grand reunion will occur during Daud's final return on Kippurim, reconciliations, which leads to Sukkah, camping out with our father and his family forevermore. In this way, with the proclamation to leave Babylon and restore Yahushalem, the source of guidance on reconciliation, one event foreshadows the next, becoming a harbinger of what follows, each step 152 liberating us from religious influence and political control so that we can come home and live as family. In conjunction with the redemption of his people, the Nagid, the son of the sovereign, by Nagid, publicly revealing what would occur, explaining how it would transpire, and then demonstrating the character and courage to bring this to fruition, is the one who is providing leadership and counsel as Mashyach, the Messiah. He is fulfilling his vows and those of his father over the course of the 7 mode. When God's Son is speaking, as is also the case with Eliah and Yeshua, one's brain needs to be engaged to keep pace. So, when he repeatedly indicates that to figure this out, we need to be discerning, learning by processing the information which he is providing in an intelligent manner, experience dictates that we follow his advice. In other words, we should consider how the pieces of the puzzle he has provided fit together as opposed to, say, plucking the Mashyach references out of context to promote an agenda contrary to everything else he said. To be on the same page with the Messiah, it was wise for us to linger on this page with him for a while. In this light, we must face something exceedingly unpleasant. Daud's gruesome and heroic portrayal of his fulfillment of Pesach and Matzah, leading to Bikurim in the 22nd Mizmor is gut-wrenching. After describing what would happen to him in Jerusalem more than 400 years prior to this proclamation in Babylon, and 1000 before its fulfillment, the following pronouncement may be the most cathartic ever made. It's not just that Israel's king and savior endured Roman crucifixion followed by incarceration in hell on their behalf, but, worse, his people universally denied that he had done so. While it is hard to fathom, his prophecy reflects upon this, forecasting that something particularly egregious 153 would occur in Yerushalayim in 7 plus 62 weeks of years from the pronouncement to return from Babylon and restore the city. And be assured, his prophecy is far too important to have anything to do with buildings, plazas, broad avenues, defensive walls, or moats, as other translators will claim. When we turn to the verbal root of the words Daud selected, we discover that what is going to be shub, restored and banar, established is rechob, the way to grow by Karuz, being diligent and decisive. What is being foretold is the fulfillment of the first four Mikrai in year 4000 because they provide the benefits of the covenant, the means to grow and expand, for those who are diligent and decisive regarding the terms of acceptance. The Messiah is also reminding us that this will occur B'Tzok in a troubling time of oppression, of anguishing subjugation, restrictions and constraints. Daud is speaking of Yahweh being persecuted and harassed by imperial Rome and then pushed into a corner and confined by her church. This abuse will continue, even unto the present day, albeit with additional perpetrators. Daud not only knew what was going to happen to himself and his people, but he also warned us about the impending doom 6 to 10 centuries before it occurred, both here and throughout his Psalms. Inexcusably and ignorantly, when history played out exactly as he foretold, rather than celebrate the affirmation of his prophecies and benefit from the result, God's people contrived two antagonistic religions based upon misappropriating everything he said, promoting two false messiahs in his place. It is hard to imagine a greater gift or a more shameful response. And after, Wa'achar, then at another time, following this in the end, the 62 weeks, Ha 154 Shabuwaim Sheshim Washanim, based upon the promise of 7, in 60 and 2 weeks, the anointed Messiah, Mashyach, the one who was chosen, authorized, and anointed by God, will be cut down and uprooted to establish a covenant. Karath, will be severed from the source and banished, removed and replaced to cut another agreement with stipulations, Nephilim imperfect. This will be done to him on an ongoing basis. But not his author himself, YYV7C4, such that he is negated and replaced, his life for naught. Then, Wa, the people and nation, Am, the army and institution, of the commanding officer and supreme leader, who is making copious announcements and prolific declarations, Nagid, the absolute ruler conspicuously avowing, publishing, and confessing his message in your face, who is to come, Habo, who will arrive, Kal participle, will attempt to corrupt and destroy, Shakath, will seek to ruin and render useless, castrate and cast off, annihilating, Hyphal imperfect, the city, Ha-Ir, the largest population center. And the set apart, Waha Kodesh, those and that which are separated and distinct, uncommon and devoted, both as individuals and as a sanctuary. And, Wa, its end, and his, case Hugh, this completion of a duration of time to be chopped down and torn asunder. Note, Ir, Kodesh, Am, and Nagid are all masculine singular and could be addressed by Hugh. Outrageousness, will be wiped away by an overpowering force. Hashetef, overbearing nature will be overwhelmed and inundated. Also, to the very last moment, wired Ks, as far as the completion of this duration of time to chop off and tear asunder, it is certain, chariots, it will be determined and decreed, spoken about and decided upon, that there will be devastating and desolating, shamam, destructive and ruinous, wasteful and astonishing, appalling and 155 horrifying, war, milchama, a state of constant and continuous fighting. Daniel, God is my means to decide between vindication and condemnation, Daniel 9:26. This self-portrait is awe-inspiring, both courageous and compassionate. It is hard to properly convey the enormity of this moment. I am overwhelmed by what he had volunteered to endure and overjoyed by what he accomplished. I am also horrified by what the religious have done to cheat him and us of the magnitude of this gift. This may be the saddest pronouncement ever written. In what was the most altruistic and noble act in human history, the Messiah came to Jerusalem in year 4000 to fulfill Pesach and Matzah for the benefit of Bikurim and Shabuah, all for the emancipation, enrichment, and empowerment of the covenant's children while saving his people from themselves. He had written about his decision, affirming that he had earned his father's approval and support, as we will read throughout his early Mizmor. He would even describe the ordeal in excruciating detail in his 22nd Mizmor. And now, Dowd was providing his people with the exact day it would transpire. Although Dowd had addressed his commitment to fulfilling the modim beginning with Pesach as clearly and comprehensively as words allow, and although Yahowah had copiously confirmed and explained every promise throughout the prophets, the achievement of father and son would be unheralded for 2,000 years. These first-person prophecies had been written in their land by their most famous king in their language and affirmed by their God. Nonetheless, the most intelligent ethnicity would remain ignorant and irrational, indeed, disrespectful and in denial. Dowd, the Son of God and Messiah, not only returned to Jerusalem to fulfill Pesach and Matzah on behalf of 156 Bikurim and Shabuah in the Yabel year of 4000 year, he told the world the exact day he would arrive. And then sadly, he also revealed that his people would derive the worst possible outcome from the greatest possible gift. Everything he represented would be uprooted to establish a covenant that had nothing to do with him or what he had achieved. It was the ultimate rejection. After having enabled the covenant relationship, his people created Judaism and Christianity to insult him. Considering that he was the most credible witness in human history, a proven prophet, the most acclaimed Messiah, God's chosen implement and his firstborn son, a king unlike any other, and that he was offering to sacrifice himself to save his people, it had to be heartbreaking to know that they would reject his magnanimous offer. More pitiful still, after being tortured to death by the Romans to fulfill Pesach and provide life, and then be cut off from the living to exonerate Israel on Matzah, rather than respect what he had done and benefit from the covenant he had enabled, he would be replaced by two mythical messiahs to conjure up religions with entirely different stipulations. Never in the annals of human events has one person accomplished so much for so many only to have his sacrifice denied by all. All the while, Imperial Rome would make copious threats to destroy the city while the Roman Catholic Church would seek to castrate the set-apart people. And in the evolution from one beast to the other, their carnage would be unchecked for centuries. All the while, Dowd's accolades and achievements would be stolen from him and denied. Both Christians and Jews alike would foist false messiahs on an ignorant world, wrapping all manner of religious myths around them, and in the process, deny the true Messiah and disavow what he had achieved. And in so doing, the prophecy which predicted this horrid outcome 157 was misappropriated to justify the tragic mistake in judgment. The only prophetic statements which rival this in importance are 2 Samuel 7, Mizmor 89, and Yeshaya 9. It was in the first of these, reading Yahowah's response to Dowd wanting to build a home for him, that we were finally able to resolve the identity of the eternal Son and returning King. And all that was required for it to be consistent with the whole of God's story was to understand the change in audience, from God speaking to Dowd through Nathan, to God speaking of him to us, and then back to speaking directly to his Son. Similarly, the identity of the Son in Yeshaya 9 lay in the recognition that only one name was given to identify him, just as there is only one person to whom all of the accolades are applicable. In the preamble to this prophecy, Gabriel, God's most capable and courageous man, listed many things which would be resolved as a result of what he would accomplish, some of which were achieved during Chag Matzah while most will be fulfilled upon Dowd's Yom Kippurim return. They are listed together because they will be accomplished by the same Messiah, and the Mikra work in unison. And speaking of Mashyach, if not Dowd, how would a new one have been anointed such that we could learn of him? Dowd had clearly stated that this would bring an end to prophecy. There would be no one for Yahowah to work with or speak through at this time. Since we know the date of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, and we can do the math, we know that the Messiah's arrival was 4 days before Pesach in the Yabel year of 4000 year, 33 CE, in perfect harmony with the Torah's instructions. Mashyach's basar, body was carrot, cut down and died on Passover. His Nepesh, 158 soul was carrot, separated from his father on unyeasted bread, a Shabat, when the firstborn deposited our guilt in Shaul. He was released and returned home during the invitation of firstborn children, showing us the way. Dowd knew that this was going to occur in his city, Yerushalayim, the source of guidance regarding reconciliation, in 62 weeks of years from the pronouncement to return, not only because he was a prophet and had foreseen what would occur but, also, because he would endure it. And although the who, why, what, where, and how of Chag Matzah's fulfillment is vastly more important than when, we are provided with when as well. We are even given a starting point pursuant to the announcement to return and restore Yerushalayim by the man who built Jerusalem into the city of David 3,000 years ago. At a time certain, 62 weeks of years after Yerushalayim is rebuilt, taking us forward in time to year 4000 year, 33 CE, Dowd, with Yahowah's support, would restore and re-establish the means for the covenant's children to grow should the people be diligent and decisive while being oppressed by Imperial Rome. He did so by fulfilling the first four-mode Mikra, providing the benefits of the covenant. Rather than announcing the arrival of a Jewish Messiah who would save Jews from the Gentiles or a Christian Messiah who would die, but not for any apparent reason, this prophetic pronouncement says just the opposite. The actual Mashyach whom Yahowah anointed would be replaced to cut an entirely different agreement such that the promises God had made were abrogated to accommodate synagogue and church. The greatest life ever lived, Gabriel, God's most capable and confident individual, would be for naught, at least for most, tossed aside to make the upstart religions possible. How's that for unexpected but also profoundly important? The lone 159 justification for calling Jesus the Christ has been negated, eliminating Christianity in the process. And had they understood this prophecy, there would have been no support for Akiba's false Messiah, Bar Kokhba, son of a star. War was the result. Throughout mankind's long history of conflict, Jews would suffer and die in unprecedented numbers. And it would all transpire because, in the greatest moment in their history, they failed to acknowledge the obvious and let the Goyim, who were equally oblivious, steal their Messiah and salvation from them. And now, addressing a pressing challenge, Nagid is used twice and yet does not address the same person. In the first instance, Dowd is speaking of himself as the son of the sovereign. Often rendered as leader, officer, or official, especially as a prince, who is the son of a sovereign, the title can be good or bad depending upon the individual and circumstance. We know this because Nagid is used to address Dowd's herald, since it speaks of making an announcement such that something becomes conspicuously known. But all is not good in Jerusalem. In addition to the son of the sovereign exonerating us, Satan's prodigies will use the occasion to foist a false Messiah and new covenant on an unsuspecting world. And this makes the second use of Nagid indicative of Satan's spawn. Therefore, the Messiah is revealing that he has an evil counterpart, someone who is devoted to negating what he has achieved. Should you venture into the recently completed review of Ezekiel in volumes 2 and 3 of the Babel series, you will come to realize that Dowd's adversary is Satan. Therefore, based upon what the Messiah explains here and elsewhere, we are expecting to see the devil incarnate enter Jerusalem to foil Dowd's agenda, God's reunion with 160 his people on the 1st of Abib, April 3, 2030, 2 weeks before the witnesses' arrival on Passover. This is what I addressed previously, when explaining what was at stake with the satisfactory fulfillment of Yom Kippurim in year 6000 year. If we fail to garner an informed and receptive audience for Yahowah's and Dowd's return, the consequences are unimaginable. And in opposition to us is this evil Nagid. Since Dowd will have been victimized by those affiliated with the adversary during and following Chag Matzah, with the Romans torturing him and then religious Christians and Jews disavowing and discrediting his achievements, there is a continuity between those who destroyed the city and sanctuary in 70 CE, and again in 133 CE, even with those who would abuse the set-apart people thereafter, and the devil's advocate. This being the case, we should be on the lookout for Roman Catholics and leaders from nations that emerged from the shadow of imperial Rome. Also, since Dowd revealed that the people, nation, and army of the Nagid, military and political leader calling for the Shakath, destruction of the city are related to this adversary, we can look to Macedonia due to its prevalence in the composition of the legions which sacked Jerusalem. Although, identifying where he comes from is vastly less important than recognizing who he represents. And in this regard, while the evil Nagid is making a name for himself as we speak, and is very much alive today, I have very little interest in identifying him prematurely. And I will deal with him beginning on Chag Matzah in 2030, 2 weeks after his arrival in Yerushalayim. Enduring 3.5 years of his stench will be more than enough. We are committed, and it is foretold that Dowd's evil opposite will flail and then fail before being sent off to 161 Shaul in the fleeting moments of the 6th millennium. Upon his arrival, he will be bombastic, an outrageous character with an overwhelming presence, and imposing manner. This last day's tour de force will approach under the guise of a peacemaker, but he will quickly decide to rally the world against Israel, promoting a war that will be devastating and desolating. As we discovered in the previous statement, at a time certain, 62 weeks of years after Yerushalayim is rebuilt, taking us forward in time to year 4000 year, 33 CE, the Messiah was going to restore and re-establish the means for his people to thrive should they be diligent and decisive while being oppressed by imperial Rome. He did so by fulfilling the first 4 Mod Mikra, providing the benefits of the covenant. However, after this time, the Roman Church, based upon Paul's letters, would replace the Anointed to establish a new covenant. They would position Jesus Christ as the Son of God and the Messiah instead of Dowd, David, the man Yahowah decreed both titles. Christianity's New Testament is the result. And incredulously, they would do so by misappropriating this very prophecy, since it is the only one that speaks of the return of the Mashyach and his sacrifice. However, unfortunately for Christians, rather than announcing the arrival and death of Jesus Christ, it was spoken of Dowd and by Dowd. The actual Mashyach had his second temporal existence cut short and then was separated from his father to save his people. In the second act of the greatest life ever lived, Gabriel, God's most capable and confident individual, would perform the most heroic and compassionate act, but it would be for naught for most, tossed aside to enable two upstart religions. The lone justification for calling Jesus the Christ has been negated, eliminating the claims made by Christians and the denials which propelled Judaism's emergence. 162 inches this way, the Messiah is using the past to prepare his people for the future. Just as Yahweh were given the opportunity to recognize the Passover lamb and the fulfillment of Chag Matzah during a troublesome time, so it will be in the end. Yahweh are being afforded one final opportunity to accept what Daud and his father have done for them when they arrive together to enable the promise of Kippurim during the conclusion of the time of trouble. In the interim, 3.5 years before the world goes up in smoke, this monstrous and demonic beast under the ruse of peacemaker will Gabarbarith, confirm and strengthen a prevailing agreement, affirming his covenant ha-rabbim, with a great many, including plenty of rabbis, the preponderance of the populace, and numerous among the elite. This is an ode to the two-state solution or, as I refer to it, the final solution. He will impose the conditions of UN Resolution 242, thereby certifying Israel's destruction. What follows affirms what we have long known. While the time of Jacob's troubles will begin in the fall of 2026 and last 7 years, with the imposition of the two-state solution during Easter week in 2027, things will degrade quickly, with the worst of Jacob's troubles endured during the last 312 years, starting with the first of Abib in year 5997, April 3, 2030. The Shabat will be outlawed, Pesach corrupted, and Matzah relegated to an ingredient. There will be no Kippurim for the Torahless, putting God's gift out of reach. And Yahweh's Mikrei will be replaced with the likes of the Feast of the Beast where Daud's body and blood are on the menu. There will be a no-moon day, a do-nothing festival, and an all-stupid day for the faithful, each endorsed by Ezekiel's Lord. It is the most abhorrent and appalling of abominations, a monstrous religious edict designed to stun and stupefy 163 people far and wide. Robbed of their ability to be perceptive and think critically, the preponderance of people will die. And it will all happen quickly and decisively, paralyzing a world too traumatized to respond appropriately. And therefore, he, as an exceedingly influential person, will vault himself into prominence by arrogantly confirming and imposing, Gabar, he will strengthen and empower, then triumph by imposing a self-aggrandizing and overbearing, a treaty, a covenant agreement and arrangement, Berith, an international contractual compact and binding pledge, with a great many, including plenty of rabbis, the preponderance of people, especially the elitists, Laha Rabbim, including plenty of rabbis, the preponderance of the populace, and with numerous among the elite, either for 1 week, based upon a single promise, or during a particular Shabuah, Ekad Shabuah. Daniel 9:27 in part. The implication is that Satan's advocate will propel himself into prominence by convincing progressive and orthodox Israelis that they will achieve peace by breaking their nation into pieces and giving them to him to administer an Islamic state, with Israel retreating to her 1967 borders. The last time Muslims and Jews were in this position, the Arabs schemed to destroy Israel, initiating 3 wars in the span of 25 years. The notion that it will be different this time is ludicrous. Consider the consequence of the Oslo Accords and the abandonment of Gaza. With Israel defenseless and vulnerable, peace now will rapidly devolve into a final and horrifying battle for control of what remains. This is Satan's last-ditch effort to forestall Daud's homecoming on Kippurim, by exterminating Jews. With no one to turn for support, the carnage will be considerable. And if not for Daud's return to defend his people, all would be lost. 164 And while we are now very far afield of Daud's fulfillment of Pesach, which is the reason we turned to this prophecy, it seems sensible to continue recognizing that what remains will all transpire within the next 10 years. But halfway through the week, Wachatzi Shabuah, at the midpoint of the 7 years, he will stop the observance of the Shabbat and seek to forestall the benefit of the sacrifice which had been freely offered as a gift, Shabbath Zebach Wa Mincha. The most extreme aspect, while Ahanaf, upon a flight to the far extremity of being separated and distant, this wing, of this vile and abhorrent action of repulsive religious idolatry, Shiksim, of vile and repulsive edicts, detestable and abhorrent acts, will devastate, desolate, and incapacitate, Shamam, stun and stupefy, up to the very end, bringing destruction and annihilation, along with the conclusion of the restoring witness, Wa'ad Kala, a great longing with all-encompassing anxiety, ushering in complete and utter destruction while many die. It will occur quickly and decisively, with determination and decrees, Wa'charetz it is certain and decided, profusely poured out, Nartak, being brought forth and expressed without restraint, upon the deserted, desolated, and destroyed who are astonished and stupefied and who will perish because they are too stunned to respond, Al-Shamam, upon the devastated and destitute, the estranged and ravaged who are horrified and dismayed. Daniel, God is my means to judge, Daniel 9:27. For those who are able to hold their noses for long periods of time, and who do not mind getting dirty for a good cause, we will discover when we turn to the adversary's playbook in Ezekiel, that for Satan to prevail in his quest to rise above Yahweh in Israel, he must 165 negate what Daud has achieved and then forestall his return. To negate the Messiah, Satan possessed Shaul, Paul and Shimon, Peter to write and inspire the Christian New Testament, replete with a false Messiah, imposing their toxin on the world through Imperial Rome and Roman Catholicism. The adversary would also use Rabbi Akiba, and his institutionalizing of Rabbinic Judaism to lead Jews away from the truth, also initiating the process with the declaration of a false Messiah. Working both ends against the middle while proving that two wrongs do not make a right, Satan managed to hide Daud's sacrifice for the preponderance of people. But that is not sufficient to prevail because the adversary must also forestall Daud's return on the day of reconciliations. And for that to occur, he must either persuade every remaining Jew to choose him over Yahweh or kill them all such that there is no one left to reconcile. And that is what is explained in Daniel 9:27. Now that we have listened to all Daud had to say on this occasion, it's time to set the parameters and do the math, so that we can attest to the exact day the Messiah entered Jerusalem to fulfill Passover. In this regard, it is helpful to know that a prophetic year isn't equivalent to a solar year, and that the concept of a 365.25-day year was not part of the vocabulary at the time. Therefore, to ascertain the number of days in 62 weeks of years, we should adjust our measurements to the prophetic process. This consists of 12 months of 30 days, not the 365.242 to which we are now accustomed. This duration of time also differed from the Babylonian method because they observed a lunisolar year in which 7 intercalary months were added every 19 years to prevent the shifting of seasons. At the time, while a lunar calendar remained the only practical timekeeping device before mass communication and mechanics, the lunisolar system gave everyone a reliable 166 means to set their clocks. Every renewed moon marked the start of a new month. The Jews used a slightly different method with the same result. An intercalary month was added based on the emergence of barley, the first grain to rise in the spring. Fruit harvested in the suburbs of Yerushalayim, Jerusalem was tested as they approached the nearest renewed moon to the vernal equinox. If the grain was green and growing, still laden with water, it would dance in a hot pan placed above an open fire. In that case, the next renewing moon would designate the beginning of a new year. However, since this could lead to confusion over centuries of time, with no way to predict one year to the next in advance, the length of a prophetic year, 360 days, was established in Bereshith, Genesis, where events related to the flood are given in both days and years. The date of the word which came forth to restore and rebuild Jerusalem is presented in Nehemiah. There we read, "And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when I, Nehemiah, said to the king, If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Yehuda, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it. So, it pleased the king to send me." Nehemiah, Comforts, Nehemiah 2:1-6. Many scholars, including Sir Isaac Newton, ascribe the 20th year of Artaxerxes to 445 BCE. It's simple arithmetic. His father, Xerxes, died in 465 BCE. Add 20 years to accommodate Nehemiah's testimony and you arrive at 445 BCE. But they failed to take into consideration the drama that transpired following Xerxes' murder, something that they could not have known at the time of their calculations. 167 We have subsequently learned that King Xerxes was killed in his sleep by an ambitious fellow named Artabanus, who also murdered his heir apparent, Darius. The next oldest son in the royal line, Hustapi, was out of the country. That made Artaxerxes, a mere teenager, the acting king while Hustapi was located and brought back home. We can assume that Artabanus left Artaxerxes alive, believing he could rule through him as regent. But 7 months later, he apparently changed his mind and tried to kill Artaxerxes. Then as fate would have it, the teenage heir unapparent killed Artabanus instead. Hustapi, the actual heir apparent, arrived shortly thereafter and tried to claim the throne. So, Artaxerxes, now an accomplished murderer, killed his older brother to resolve the question of ascension. All of this maneuvering took the better part of a year. Therefore, since Artaxerxes didn't assume the throne until late in 465 BCE, his first regnal year wasn't complete until late 464 BCE. And that would make the starting date of Daud's prophecy the first of Abib, Nisan, 444 BCE. Corroborating this, over the past century, archaeologists have discovered and translated thousands of cuneiform tablets from the ruins of Babylon. And in the process, we have discovered that due to this infighting among rivals, Artaxerxes was officially coronated in 464 BCE. This serves to affirm that his 20th regnal year, and thus the starting date of Daud's prophecy, was the 1st of Abib, Nisan, 444 BCE. So, from the Abib 1, 444 BCE date, we must add 7 weeks of years, 7 by 7 equals 49 prophetic years, until Yerushalayim would be rebuilt. Then there would be another 62 weeks, 62 by 7 equals 434 prophetic years, for a total of 483, 49 plus 434 equals 483, years until the one who would be 168 tortured by the Romans, denied by the Jews, and replaced by the Christian would fulfill Pesach. To calculate his arrival, we must multiply the 483 years by the 360 days in the Torah's prophetic calendar. This equals 173,880 days or 476 solar years plus an additional 24 days. To derive the correct result, we should then add this duration of time to our starting date in 444 BCE. Recognizing that there was no year zero in the Julian or Gregorian calendars, the addition of 173,880 days to Abib 1, 444 BCE sets the Messiah's arrival in Jerusalem to Monday, March 28, 33 CE, Gregorian, or Monday, March 30th, 33 CE, Julian, which was the 10th of Abib on the Hebrew calendar, the very day the Passover lamb was to arrive in what we know to be year 4000 year. Just as they had in Hezekiah's time, large crowds would have gathered in Yerushalayim, the source of guidance on reconciliation as the Pesach Ale was brought into the city. Daud would have lived and walked among the people for 4 days. The intent was for the people to get to know him, a noted failure on their part. Then as the sun set, and the 14th day of Abib began, Daud observed the Passover feast with his father, and perhaps with friends, fully aware of what would soon transpire over the course of the next 2 days. After all, he had written about the ordeal, vividly describing the effects of Roman crucifixion many centuries before Rome or its favored form of torture even existed. As he had foretold, the Romans ripped his skin and soft tissues from his upper torso and legs, rendering the Messiah an unrecognizable bloody pulp. Then they took what remained of his body and nailed it to a crucifixion stake, assuring that his final hours would be as excruciating as possible. Such was the glory of Rome. And such is its church, which announces its presence and influence through the image of a tortured and dead God on a stick. 169 It was just before sunset on the 14th day of Abib, Friday, April 3, 33 CE, year 4000 year, that the corporeal Basar, body of the Son of God and Messiah, the physical incarnation of the Zarewah, sacrificial lamb, was killed by the beast of Rome. Immediately thereafter, Daud's Nepesh, incorporeal soul, was laden with the guilt of his people and descended into the darkness of Sheol. The gruesome remains of his corpse were incinerated, in keeping with the Torah's instructions. Adding to the intrigue, there was a lunar eclipse during this Passover on April 3, 33 CE, occurring at 1648 local time in Jerusalem on the 14th of Abib in year 4000 year. With sunset occurring at 7 p.m., the lunar eclipse would not have been visible in the city, which is understandable since there was no one there to make sense of it anyway, but it may have been God's way of demarcating the moment Pesach was fulfilled, 4:48 in the afternoon. This would have provided 2 hours and 12 minutes to dispose of Daud's physical body, laden his soul with our guilt, and transport him to Sheol to begin Matzah at precisely 7 p.m. His Nepesh would have been released at 7:01 p.m. the following day, at the conclusion of Abib 15 year 4000 year, April 4, 33 CE. Having fulfilled Matzah by depositing our guilt in Sheol during the long Shabat of Friday night and Saturday, April 3 and 4, Daud's soul was released by the set-apart spirit so that he could celebrate Bikurim as the Bakar, firstborn of the covenant. The prophecy of the first Mikra, invitation to be called out and meat of Pesach, Passover, was fulfilled, right down to the last detail. There should have been no mistaking what he had done, at least for those who Rosh consistently seek to know Yahowah, who are Torah observant, and who thoughtfully consider what the Messiah and Son of God wrote of himself throughout his Mizmor 170. Showing our appreciation for what Father and Son have done, we should answer God's invitation and observe the Mikra of Pesach, keeping this appointment with Yahowah. The 14th day of Abib is not difficult to establish. Passover is marked by the full moon closest to the spring equinox. We should observe Pesach, Passover, by seeking to understand the intent of Yahowah's instructions, doing as much of what the Torah teaches as possible. This Chag feast should be celebrated with Israel and the covenant family in mind. The menu is roasted lamb and unyeasted bread with olive oil and bitter herbs, consistent with that of the first celebrants. As we observe Chag Matzah, always keep 2 things in mind. First, our Savior, Daud, the Messiah and Zarewah, made this sacrifice for us. At the very least, we ought to acknowledge and appreciate him for having done so. And second, Pesach is the first of a succession of 4 Mikrei, one that serves as a prelude to Matzah and leads to Bikurim and then Shabuah. Do not start down this path unless you are committed to continuing all the way to Sukkah. While we are reminiscing over the promise of life eternal, we can focus on what occurred during the first Passover as Yahowah presents his story in Shemoth, Exodus 12 and 13. Then Kara, read the prophecies in Shamuel, 2 Samuel 7, Yashaya, Isaiah 53 and Mizmor, Psalms 22, 88, and 89, all of which are translated for your benefit within these volumes. They speak vividly of God's intent and Daud's provision for Yisrael and the Berith, covenant family.